All right, and we'll count up. Always have to breathe. Always have to let it breathe. So Cecil has something to snip before we dive in. And stand up in the deep end. All right, let's go ahead and go live, everyone. Is it time to welcome Keke Coutee into the circle of trust just as the fantasy playoffs are starting? That and more this week on the couch. Paul Charchian. I'm totally irrational when it comes to Keke Coutee. So give me a rationality check. Because, guillotine leagues. Because guillotine leagues add mortality to a player's outlook week to week. So trusting Keke Coutee is a matter of life or death. What say you, Paul Charchian?
Well, I'm maybe the wrong person to ask because 1 week ago today, I was sneering at the suggestion that Keke Coutee could carry a passing game single-handedly because I expected Brandon Cooks to get double, triple, take away Brandon Cooks, make Keke Coutee beat you. Well, Keke Coutee shows up with 8 catches at 141 yards, and I look like an ass. So I didn't think that he had it in him. And Brandon Cooks ended up, defeating himself for part of this game. Well, he got injured. You don't do it to yourself, but he ended up missing, a healthy chunk of the game anyway. And Coutee stepped up with a big performance. Now, I guess my question is, he won't catch. Is it Chicago this week? He won't catch the Bears by surprise. Bears pass defense has been shockingly mortal over the past month. Yeah. But still, if you're going to ask me, is a Fuller versus Coutee matchup I'm still taking Fuller in that matchup. Yeah. So Deshaun Watson has played at such a great level. And if the defense wasn't awful, Houston would be a 500 team and he'd be in the conversation for MVP. And I wouldn't put anything by him, but I'm not ready to give my heart to Keke Coutee on one particularly great game. And it was a great game for him. Yeah. I can't do it yet. Maybe I'm being unfairly pessimistic.
No, it's fair. I mean, hey, we're always trying to confirm our priors, And look, I'd like that you brought up maybe the most important name in this conversation is Deshaun Watson. And by the way, Texans play Colts week 15. So maybe it's pick up Keke if he goes off on your bench. You maybe get a bye. That's even better. Yeah. Because it is that matchup, as I've pointed out many times when he broke the record for catches in a debut, it was against the Colts.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
How many was that? How many catches? That was a long time ago.
11.
11. Yeah. Wow.
So we'll see. But it's about Deshaun Watson. And it's real interesting, Paul. I mean, you can't help but think of the greater story arcs of quarterbacks and how they're so intimately connected to the greater story arcs of franchises and where we are with Deshaun Watson, right? Like the picture from Deshaun Watson last week was the head down towel. And had just fumbled the game away, basically. But he's the only reason they're in the game. Yes. But he's easy to feel good about and get the warm fuzzies when you're putting your fantasy fate somehow on his shoulders. So we have that for Keke this week. Chicago defense, as you said, showing cracks lately. Yeah,
big time.
Not a fearsome defense, not a defense that is shrinking the range of possibilities for players in a fantasy. How about what Matthew Stafford did last week? Are we looking at this Lions offense differently, right? Darrell Bevel. Like maybe this is a meaningful coaching change in season, Charch, where Bevel says, if I want to pick it up, Matthew Stafford seems to be invigorated. We know Matthew Stafford in a comfortable surroundings can be very good for fantasy and very good. And indeed, and staying in the division this week against Green Bay, are you looking at, Marvin Jones differently? DeAndre Swift hopefully will be back. Is this an offense you want to trust?
No, I'm not ready to trust the Lions yet. I'm not there. And, it's just too many inconsistent games. Now, Kenny Golladay, I got to think there's at least a coin flip chance that he comes back finally here. But when he does, he gets Jair Alexander. Alexander's been terrific so far this season. In fact, if you don't mind, I'd like to give you just some quick stats on Alexander, if it's not too much trouble. Let me just pull that up. So here's what he's done on a per game basis. He's given up 1 touchdown since the opener and 23 yards per game in his coverage. That's Jair Alexander. And he's faced plenty of good wide receivers over the course of the season, of course, everybody has. And he routinely gets Not always, he doesn't always shadow, but he does often shadow opposing number ones. And I wouldn't bother to shadow Marvin Jones. So,
Right.
I don't know that Kenny Golladay instantly moves the needle so far up that I suddenly feel like I can trust what has otherwise been a very inconsistent Matthew Stafford, who, by the way, I think is just a side note. And now I've already played like 3 tangents into this conversation, and I'm sorry for that. Sort of.
That's why we're here.
I don't think he's the Lions quarterback next year, one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
I think either the Lions with a high draft pick are going to get Young there. He could retire or get traded. And I think there's any one of those 3 things. If you had to just say opening day, week 1, 2021, is Matthew Stafford the starting quarterback? I don't think so.
Yeah, well, this is good. We're going to have a backbone here, I think, thinking about these things in terms of quarterbacks, because I was thinking about that while you were talking, that the Lions are at a crossroads. Keep hearing Robert Saleh connected to them. Mm-hmm. My buddy Zane Hunt, via 313, making that connection, Detroit native. Where is this franchise going to go with Matthew Stafford? Is he going to be somewhere else next year? As we watch the 49ers on Monday night, you think about that quarterback situation.
Yeah.
And Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. We'll talk about Minnesota for sure. But probably the most epic chapter of any quarterback story, Paul, from week 13 was Carson Wentz, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we're still feeling the aftershocks now with Jalen Hurts. I guess there's that whole Shakespearean rise and fall to the Eagles, and to everything that's happened with that franchise over the last 4 years. You can talk about it in big sweeping terms, operatic terms like I am, or we can just get down to the nitty gritty, because it's Rich Rebar, Lord Reeves. It's the Konami Code Bowl. The Konami Code, of course, referring to how it's a hack for quarterbacks, a cheat code if they're runners. Hurts versus Hill. Did you think it would come to this in 2020, Paul?
No, I didn't. I honestly, I was wrong, but I thought Carson Wentz was sitting on a bounce back year with what I presumed would be healthier and better receivers. That hasn't really panned out on either front. I thought it was going to be better. I thought the offensive line was going to be better. And I had seen these glimmers of just greatness from Wentz that we had seen, and was the reason they gave him the fat contract that they're now stuck with. And that's the real bind for Eagles fans, is there's no way out of that deal. He's got if they cut him this offseason, it's, I think, $56 million in cap hit. And even if they wait that out for another, 14 months from now and cut him, it's still 20s and change million of a cap hit. So and they're not so bad that they're necessarily going to find quarterback help in the draft. And even if you do, what do you do with Wentz? He's untradeable. Nobody's going to move for him. The Eagles and Eagles fans are in the situation the Viking fans thought they were when the Vikings started 1-5 and had an underperforming quarterback under a big contract. Now, as it turns out, Kirk Cousins has played his way into what looks like he's overproducing for his contract, and the Eagles are in that same spot where they're stuck.
Do you think so? If an organization called you up, Paul, and said, it's interesting, when it comes to numbers and contracts, you always can figure out a way. Agents, lawyers. I don't know if there's a way that a contract can be restructured or something to make Wentz more attractive in the trade market. But if someone were to say, because what we've seen is a structural failure, like a complete collapse, right?
Yes.
Like anywhere you put the microscope on the Eagles organization, you see failure. You see damage. And it's not to make excuses for Wentz. It's just to accurately describe what happened. Everything. It was a colossal organizational-wide failure, whether you look at personnel acquisition and decisions, or the players themselves' ability to stay healthy. And with Wentz, you have a quarterback who is kind of a cowboy, out there. And when he's trying to, shoot his way out against that environment, it's not going to happen. But is he broken, Paul? Is there going to be a better second act for him?
I think with a different team there could be, but he is a broken player. I think when you see somebody who had the confidence is completely shot, and the confidence that he had as a rookie, Sig. I mean, remember his rookie season when he was awesome, and we really thought there was no reason to think that this day would ever come back then. I was doing Philadelphia radio last week, and I on WIP, and I asked the hosts that I was on with, is there talk about just melting down the team? And they said, well, of course. I mean, a lot of the fan base is just, let's lose out. Let's get to the top of the draft. Let's trade away everybody. Let's go Miami Dolphins on it. And I said, well, okay, but the problem with that is you're going to have to give up good young players to acquire good draft picks, like the Dolphins did with Minkah Fitzpatrick, for Pete's sake, right? Or Laramie Tunsil. Those were good players. If you want a first-round draft pick, you got to give up good players. And then he came back to me. He said, well, who are the good young players that we'd protect? And well, you're right. I mean, offensively and defensively, they're really. I don't know that there is a great young, even one great young player on either side of the ball that you'd want to protect.
Yeah, Miles Sanders could be great, or could at least be great and occasionally frustrating. But it just hasn't been an environment that has created any sort of overachievers offensively. And Jalen Hurts, I mean, it's the Saints, it's the Saints defense.
Bad spot to start him.
Yeah. And it could just be like a rough afternoon, just rough seas in general for the Eagles offense. There's a sort of exhale, I think, that goes along with the franchise making this move at this time. Whatever it brings, it signifies failure. I go back to Howie Roseman saying, we're not looking for a replacement for Carson when they drafted Hurts. And anyway,
maybe they weren't at the time, but that's the hand that's been dealt them. So for Jalen Hurts, after the Saints, which I think is a brutal start, and I'm not touching him here,
right,
at Arizona, which feels like a neutral opportunity, but then Week 16 at Cowboys. That's it. You're in a QB flex league. That might be your dart throw to find out if you can get a little something special done.
Yeah, and even if he's not good, he can still be good for fantasy. He can still rack up enough yards, especially with the possibility of him finishing drives as a runner. And Philadelphia could also just start to crumble, and he could have those come from behind game scripts in the second half. So we'll see. We'll see what happens here with Philadelphia. Let's go. Always, it's a Minnesota show,
Well, it doesn't have to be. Although I do love the purple background, predominantly purple background that we've got here.
In space, nice. It is a beautiful purple. But so you got the Vikings, such a paradox, a contradiction in terms almost, Paul, that they're winning to get back in the playoff race, but they're playing some of the worst football they played all year. It's bizarre, but here they are, and I think that's the thing about the NFL, like the marathon through the minefield. That just every team is going to have these stumbles and these obstacles, and it's more whether they can pull it back together or they just stay in a tailspin. So this Tampa Bay game this weekend is it's kind of it's a playoff preview. We're getting to a real log jam. Like there's 5 and 7 teams can still entertain the idea of making the playoffs in the NFC right now. Minnesota's at 6-6, Tampa's at 7-5. But I think with Tampa and Minnesota, you have one of these matchups where can Minnesota can they go away from their identity and not try to establish the run because it's Tampa Bay. And you're going into the teeth of the defense, and you have Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, and Kirk Cousins is throwing the ball very well right now. So that's where you want to attack. Do you think they have it in them to go ahead and be a week-to-week identity team? We've seen Cleveland do this. Kevin Stefanski, I had him on my agenda for stuff to talk about, Paul, because we talked about it last time. Isn't it great? Isn't it great to see Kevin Stefanski should be the toast of the league right now? Cleveland doing great. That's what he's shown, right? You can go against type, go against identity when the matchup calls for it, or just in a way to like catch the opponent by surprise. Do they have it in them?
I talked to Kevin Stefanski last Friday, as a matter of fact, had him on my radio show in KFAN.
Yes.
And he's been gracious with his time and with our station because he knows the Minnesota market, and he knows who we are, and it's great. And we talked a lot. We talked about Baker Mayfield, as you can imagine, and he talked about the monsoon games, and you play the hand you're dealt with, and we weren't going to pass. we've got these great running backs that he loves. And he said, we're fortunate that we can, if we need to just go run to win a game, we can do that. And he said, foreshadowing what was going to happen, we really believe that if I need to let Baker Mayfield go past us to victory, he can do that. And first half, he did that. And so they're still the most run heavy team in the league, but Baker Mayfield's proven in spots, he's going to be fantasy startable. I don't know that this is one of them coming up this week against Baltimore, but Stefanski's definitely learned from his time with the Vikings. And that brings me to your previous conversation of Dalvin Cook and Tampa Bay this week. Dalvin Cook's going to, it's going to test the mettle of fantasy owners and test potentially the bench of fantasy owners. I mean, let's talk about this matchup for just a moment,
right?
And just how hard it is against Tampa Bay. The last running back to top 45 rushing yards, which is an incredibly low threshold, 45 rushing yards against the Bucs, was in week 2, Christian McCaffrey, and he only put up 59. And since week 3, only one back has caught 30 yards against the Bucs. So you can't even talk about how often, many times you got a great run defense, you can get something done through the air. That's not going to be the case here either. And if you think Dalvin Cook is just too good to bench against Tampa, tell that to the Aaron Jones owner who got 10 carries for 15 yards, or the Alvin Kamara owner who got 12 carries for 16 yards, or the Josh Jacobs owner who got 10 carries for 17 yards. And granted, Kamara was able to score in both of his games, but if you don't get that touchdown, you get daggered. And here we are in the fantasy playoffs. And I can't tell you that Cook is going to perform in this game. And, with the absurd level of wear and tear on Cook as well, that could catch up to him in any game. It could catch up to him in the form of injury. It could catch up to him in the form of just reduced efficacy. And no team sees fewer rushes than Tampa does. There's just so many ways for this thing to go sideways for Dalvin Cook. Yet fantasy owners are looking at the best player on their roster and have to seriously contemplate whether they've got the stones to potentially bench Dalvin Cook in a brutal matchup for Devontae Booker, who they just picked up off the waiver wire and has on paper an easier matchup.
Well, yeah, and Devontae Booker is, come on. I hope that, again, I said last week, I said the words trust and Devontae Booker and fantasy football just didn't quite fit together yet, but there are interesting data points. I think what you lay out about Cook this week, if he has 50, 60 total yards and no touchdowns, and there are some touchdowns there to be harvested against Tampa. You can move the ball against Tampa, so there's touchdowns there. Like Kamara had a couple of touchdowns in one of the games. McCaffrey had a couple of touchdowns in his game. Yeah. It's there. Yeah. And just there aren't that many reliable running backs, Paul.
I know. That's part of the
problem. Who are we really starting every week without question? James Robinson, Derrick Henry, Chris Carson, Austin Eckler. You'd really have to have quite a constellation of hits and Kamara, of course, on your picks to be in a situation where I don't know, Jonathan Taylor, we can toss that one out, or David Montgomery. Are these guys that you would say if someone came to you and said, okay, I've got Dave Montgomery against the Texans, Taylor against the Raiders, or Dalvin Cook, because my other running back is, Chris Carson or James Robinson. Like I know I've got him cemented in there.
That's probably what it would take. You mentioned Austin Eckler, by the way. He's got Atlanta. And, I think when we started the season, we looked at that as a very plus matchup for Eckler and a reason that you held on to him all through that long stretch. And now we get to here we are in week 14, and the Falcons are shockingly stout against the run. They've allowed 5 rushing touchdowns all season. No back is top 90 yards. And for the first time in my lifetime, teams can't pass on the Falcons through the running back position either. Since week 6, opposing backs are averaging 2.5 catches and 16 receiving yards. And nobody scored through the air against the Falcons since week 6. Even Eckler's not a sure thing this week.
No, but since you mentioned Eckler, one of the other things I was thinking about as because again, what's summing up the running back landscape right now is there just aren't that many reliable weekly running backs. And what's interesting is, and you mentioned with Cook, yes, and when you watch Cook, especially now, the specter of injury looms. because he just doesn't run with any regard for his body, and they will just, what is it, 32 carries last week?
Yes.
I mean, what is it, the national championship game? Come
Right.
on, there's a lot of football left to be played. So you're right that there's that risk, and I love to mention Mike Boone, who, speaking of specters, as long as Masson is recovering from his appendectomy, but there just aren't that many reliable running backs. And Cook is wearing down. I mean, we could lose him at any point. Henry hasn't really been doing anything lately.
No.
Derrick Henry.
Yep.
So it may be that you look back and Kamara could get Breeze back just in time, but you look back and it's if you drafted McCaffrey or Eckler, especially McCaffrey's really the emblematic story here, and you just survived with all the missed games of McCaffrey. Like you just found a way to like keep it together with duct tape and baling wire and just keep your car running on the road, and you get to the fantasy playoffs with Christian McCaffrey. Checkmate. You know, I mean, he's still like it can be like a 30-point game player. You get a Denver defense just lost Boye, and you think Denver's going to be like really deflated, I think.
Oh God, the Denver secondary is a train wreck right now. Yeah. Have you seen the guys that what they're looking at as a starting secondary?
Right.
So they're going to be without suspended cornerback AJ Bouye. Their slot cornerback Isang Bassi tore his ACL last week, and Bryce Callahan just went on IR last week. Vic Fangio is going to go to war with rookie Michael Olemudia,
I think.
Olemudia, thank you. And then some combination of Duke Dawson, Devontae Bosby, and Kevin Tolliver.
Right.
That's a train wreck. Now, it'll be fascinating to see if Teddy Bridgewater will even have Curtis Samuel and DJ Moore to take advantage of that. But if he does, maybe Teddy Bridgewater becomes an interesting dart throw this week, particularly in QB flex leagues.
Yeah, well, and with Bridgewater, speaking of quarterback arcs, I really felt like, and I love Teddy, I really felt like that Minnesota game, I felt something speak out of the void, Paul, and just say, like, it's not going to happen. Like, I mean, I love Teddy, and Teddy's can be a very valuable part of a team, like he was for the Saints last year. He can be a very valuable backup quarterback, but when he's your plan, then you're limiting what your franchise can do. And it's just
correct. And the Bridgewater Cousins thing has never left Minnesota from the time the Vikings made the decision to let both Teddy Bridgewater and why am I spacing on Case Keenum's name? And Case Keenum go with Kirk Cousins. It's been a divided fan base, and it's taken a long, long time for Kirk Cousins to earn the trust of the fan base, which even now in the middle of the best, arguably the best run of his career right at this moment, he hasn't been quite there until 2 weeks ago. Teddy Bridgewater comes back, and it's Teddy versus Kirk, and anybody with a pair of eyes can see that you've got two quarterbacks operating on a materially different level, and Teddy's a beautiful game manager. And he won't give away games, but he just doesn't have the tool set within him to go win games with the athleticism he's got. So we've finally gotten here in Minnesota to a point where the fan base, I think, would have cheered louder for Teddy Bridgewater when that game started than they would have for Kirk Cousins, were they coming out of their respective locker rooms. But by the end of the game, the fan base would have preferred to have Kirk almost to a man.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, this is a good offshoot to take the off ramp to I want to just celebrate some heroes, some Week 13 heroes, as we are now on the verge of the fantasy football playoff weeks. Whenever players do things that will haunt us or we'll always remember with a smile on our face, or otherwise, it simulates again that mortality. Guillotine leagues. We've talked about guillotine leagues, just in case you just don't know. Check it out. I feel like I need to always draw attention to that.
Thank you.
But let's start with just taking a moment out to appreciate Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
And I did the recap show too, but here's all you need to know. He's on lists with Randy Moss. He's on short lists where one of the other names is Randy Moss. Multiple times I saw that this week. And he really does look like something out of a dream, where he's just like a truly idealized version of like watching him at LSU, like what he could be in the NFL at his peak. That's the other thing is he's come in a la AJ Brown. He's really come in at his peak, and it is just something to behold. And here's where I get to point out, because I'm 2 years in New Orleans is enough that like New Orleans loves itself some New Orleans. That's all I can say. Like the person I met someone who made like dog treats, and they said the only stuff that sells is like the New Orleans themed stuff. Anyway, the gritty, you know what I'm talking about. The gritty.
Yes.
Originated in New Orleans.
Did
Landry
not know
Walker
that.
High.
That's the
high
business.
School.
Wow.
Yes. Justin Jefferson's high school, one of his teammates. Do the
idea.
gritty.
I can't. If I could, I would do it right now. I'd stand up because you can see me, and I'd do it right this minute. A little on Jefferson. Not only is he being in the same list of Randy Moss, he is on pace right now. He is ahead of Randy Moss in receptions and yards. He's behind in touchdowns, but not by much. And he's got a chance to have the best rookie receiving season ever.
Yeah.
Anquan Bolden he's in this conversation with Anquan Bolden, who blew us away when he had his rookie season. And the kid his route running is stunning for a kid who's 12 games into his career. It's remarkable seeing him spin cornerbacks around, find ways to get open. The contested catches, he's already a complete receiver, and paired with Kirk's arm, and Kirk's got a good downfield arm with a high degree of accuracy. It's dangerous. And what we've learned about the Vikings is from times when Diggs has been out and Thielen's been there, Thielen's been out and Diggs has been there, this offense works really well when they have two good receivers for Kirk. And when they don't, it's out of sync, and they've got the two receivers in place. So it's cooking right now for Minnesota. And to get way back to your conversation about this game against Tampa, this has to be a Kirk game. And this is a game where if Kirk can somehow put the Vikings on just carry the Vikings offense to what will probably be like 34 points they're going to need to win. That's their opportunity. That's where I think he ultimately shuts down the remaining naysayers, at least in this town, and then more broadly, even I think fantasy naysayers, because he's been a good fantasy quarterback now for really most of the season. He's been a high functioning fantasy quarterback. 3 straight games with 3 touchdowns and 300 yards.
Minnesota, the whole Minnesota season, since it is a Minnesota show when Charch is here, has been kind of a testing your faith and in some ways getting your faith answered. I mean, with Rick Spielman and signing Zimmer to the extension right before the season, and the Diggs trade kind of typified this idea of what this offseason represented, trading Diggs for something more foundational for the future.
Yeah.
There's the whole Ngakoue soap opera. Isn't that fascinating? Like, would they undo that trade if they could right now? Now that they're in playoff contention.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, so the trade goes down over the Vikings bye week. So that's week 7. This team's Vikings are rolling into week 8 with 1 win.
Yeah.
1 win rolling into week 8. And saying they're in the playoffs today.
I know, exactly. So, so maybe that's one that they almost is a misfire. We'll watch him tonight with Baltimore, that they traded for him and then traded him away. It's interesting, with Spielman, I'll give him credit for breaking down these barriers for GMs. It's very rare that you see a GM within a few months of a trade undo the trade at a loss and say, I made a mistake.
Yeah. Yep.
Or I miscalculated in some way, but maybe what he miscalculated was this team. And then with Zimmer, the defense, it's almost Paul, like a forest fire went through it. And now you're seeing the new growth, little fits and starts of, occasional moments for this defense after, they bottomed out. And by the way, I forgot to mention Alan Davis is the name of Justin Jefferson's teammate, whose nickname was Gritty, hence do the gritty.
Oh, did not know that. All right.
It's incredible. It's just as a quick offshoot. It is really incredible. The gritty. Paul, do you ever remember one touchdown dance basically just taking over the NFL this way?
No, I swear I've seen other players do it on other teams.
All kinds of players are doing it. It's like the touchdown dance.
Right. I'm looking at it going, they're doing the gritty? Why would they be doing the Vikings
the Justin Jefferson dance?
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Is he already beloved? Did they like the dance? I don't know. By the way, Kirk Cousins' version of it.
Yeah.
It's avert your gaze. It's so bad.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
But I'm sure it endears himself to his teammates. Paul, it's like back in the day, like well before our time, when there'd be like the dance that would just like take over the kids, It's like all the kids are doing the whatever, or all the songs. Like you listen to the songs from the 50s and 60s, and like everyone's doing the gritty now.
What is the Last Dance craze to
the
ever?
Macarena?
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. We have to come up with a new one, Sid.
Right?
We can't.
Well, maybe it's just we're old. You know what it probably is, Paul? We're old, and there's been a lot. This is just the last one we remember, or the last time that the world cared about what we thought or our style or any sort of individuality that we had. Anyway, so, but Justin Jefferson, quite a hero against Tampa. It's a tremendous game to see what Minnesota and Tampa do, like contrasting teams. The whole Tom Brady soap opera. That's another the reality show of the NFL. Antonio Brown, that's a real popcorn thing for me, for sure. God, and just this whole franchise. So
do you believe Antonio Brown and the targets and emphasis that he has gotten has rubbed Godwin and Evans wrong?
Well, look, whether we want to make it like gossipy and have it be an idea of jealousy or taking things personally, Paul, or we just talk about the chemistry of a team. I mean, chemistry, like think about what that word means, like substances like react to each other and change each other, and you have an equilibrium that is reached in a locker room with a team's leadership and a team's sense of themselves, like how we win, what we're about, leaders in like position groups and things like that. And Antonio Brown is like a volatile chemical, I mean, just personally. And, how can that not change things in some way on and off the field? But then, Paul, that's just a tendril, like a tributary of the river of the larger story of Tom Brady. And it's this idea of the identity of the team. Is it Bruce Arians or is it Tom Brady? Who's the strongest force? And also, who has the trust of the team? Like, who does the team look to as a sense of leadership? And that's why this season has been so fascinating to watch with Tampa, with all the fits and starts. And go ahead.
Well, if Tom Brady is the driving force behind that offense, it doesn't work if your head coach isn't willing to let Tom be it. And they have to, or vice versa. And they have to be on the same page. And if they're not, then obviously it's not going to work. And so you wonder if at some point they've had a conscious, has there been a conscious effort between Brady and Arians to just talk about who owns this offense,
right?
And what's the division of labor here, and in what situations, who gets to make the key decisions in what situations, and who is this offense working for? And
isn't Arians doing that when he says Tom's not playing well?
Yeah.
Isn't Arians basically doing that?
Yeah.
I mean, he is actually saying it. Tom is the strongest force, and he's saying it ain't my fault. It's a big song here. It ain't my fault. And by the way, in the chat room, they said flossing. That's a good one. The kids, the hands. And someone else said the nay. Dance. Do the dance.
I don't know what the nay is. Do you know what that is? Can you give me a little nay right now?
I can vaguely picture it, because what's in my mind, because I'm down here in New Orleans, is twerking. Just twerking, which actually is very old, very, very old. Nothing new there. But let me steer us back. That Tampa game, I'll tell you, I in my mind's eye, I see Rob Gronkowski marauding through the Vikings defense. Is Eric Hendricks going to be okay? What even happened?
I don't think so, Sig.
Yeah.
That's
bad. And that's really bad.
And I just, the indicators I'm getting, let's put it this way, are unlikely to play. And Eric Hendricks is the best player on the Vikings.
Yeah.
And I know most people aren't even that familiar with him, but he is the glue that keeps the entire defense together. He is an astoundingly good pass coverage linebacker, and Rob Gronkowski would have been his assignment. And without him there, the drop off is massive. And you saw the Jaguars tight ends pick up, I believe it's in the neighborhood of 9 catches for 90 yards. Yeah. Jaguars tight ends with Eric Kendricks out last week. There's a big Gronk game coming this week if Kendricks doesn't go, and I that's the way we're leaning.
That game just looks like a heavyweight trading punches back and forth, like haymakers, offensive haymakers. Heroes, week 13 heroes. We'll staying with this theme because this is fun. Darren Waller. Darren freaking Waller. Some of this is the Jets, and isn't it great? Like in some ways, Darren Waller's the one that gets hit the gong on Greg Williams, along with and Gruden and Carr and Ruggs. I mean, Carr and Ruggs really hit the gong, but Waller was part of that whole game. That we can remember that. Speaking of fortune turning and things like that, as we watched the reality show play out, it was one of the top 10 all-time games by a fantasy tight end. All time.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing game.
And that includes you can take out the games by Ditka and Cloyce Box, I think was another pre-Super Bowl era guy who had a couple of games on the list. There was one tight end that no one ever heard of. And the other names on the list are Shannon Sharp, Kellen Winslow.
Wow. Yeah. Hall of Famers. Right. And, it's sad that it happened against the Jets because it tends to diminish the amazing things that he did. But it's coming. We know that of all of the receivers on that team, there's one guy that's going to be the reliable focal point for Derek Carr, and it's coming. And it doesn't necessarily mean you will stop it, but you should be able to stop it. But the Jets just can't. So it's that part is too bad that it had to be against the Jets, but it doesn't take anything away from him. And obviously he's had an astounding year, and a year in which there's been one great tight end. There's been one really good tight end, and everybody else, you're still awfully happy to have had Waller on your squad all season.
So I'll put you on the spot. I'll say taking out, and I might forget somebody, but taking out Kelsey and taking out Waller, and let's go ahead and take out Hawkinson and Goddard. Those are pretty easy calls right now. The next group. If you could pick any other tight end to go into battle with in the fantasy playoffs or in your Guillotine league, who would you want to have?
There's not an easy answer to that.
There's not as one name.
It says a lot about the tight end situation, but probably Gronk based on just the role he's on right now, and all the work he's getting now. It wasn't this way earlier, obviously, and I know he's only a handful of. I think he's sitting on less than 20 receptions on the season, but a lot lately. Tunyon is in the conversation, isn't he?
Yeah.
Tunyon, excuse me. Yes. Tunyon. And so he's in that conversation too, but I think I'm going to go Gronk here.
Yeah. Does
that sound fair?
That sounds right.
Somebody I'm missing that.
No. And I mean, Andrews, Michael Pritchard's chat room. Yeah, I was thinking Andrews, he'll be back from the COVID list. And that's another one that we kind of disqualify. But yeah, there's not an obvious, there's some guys coming on, like Gesicki is coming on. Dawson Knox is interesting. Anthony Ferguson's interesting if Johnny Smith's knee is an issue.
Yeah. Kittle coming back in the next, hopefully
Eric
in a couple
Ebron.
of weeks.
Yeah, Kittle. I don't know. It's Kittle. I want to believe with Kittle, but Dr. Gene is making me feel less optimistic about that.
Oh.
Also tight end, we've got Ebron. That never makes you feel good. I don't know. Ebron's just tainted for me. Trusting Ebron. I had this nightmare. Have I told you this, Paul?
No.
I've talked about it on the show before. When Eric Ebron got signed by the Steelers, I immediately flashed forward to this moment with the game on the line. The ball's going to be going to Ebron in the air, and I'm just going to be going, no. And he's just going to, that's going to be, it's like Jesse James all over again, But there's not much at tight end. Hunter Henry. Let me ask Hunter Henry. Is week 13 heroes, week 13 zeros? Is it really Anthony Lynn? Is it really Stain Sykin? Is it Justin Herbert? Whatever it was, 45-0 is like when you truly. I remember one of my friends drew this comic once about a kid they knew growing up. It's like when they would beat someone up, they would then pee on them.
Oh, jeez.
and that's like 45-0. That's kind of what the Patriots did to the Chargers. You have Justin Herbert and we talked about Eckler a little bit earlier. How are you? Is it changing how you feel about the Chargers offense? Or are you just chalking this one to Belichick is whole school?
I'm on the Belichick thing, and
so what about against Goff? Is Belichick going to hold school against Goff on Thursday?
Probably. I mean, they've met one time, and it was a Super Bowl. Well. They held him to 3 points. When you present where Belichick really shines in many ways, he does. is when he needs to just really focus on doing just one thing really well.
Mhm.
And in the case of the Chargers, all you have to do is limit what Justin Herbert can do. And, that's it. That's pretty much game over. And I think he focused on that and was successful. And with Goff, you can't, we've seen these crazy high games where he looks fantastic.
Right.
And then the very next week, he looks utterly incapable of playing the position. I can't trust him against Belichick. Your season's on the line.
Yeah.
Everybody's in a guillotine league now. You're one bad game away from getting chopped for the year. And I can't go Jared Goff against Belichick with my season on the line. I would start Teddy Bridgewater if he's got his two receivers ahead of Jared Goff this week, so I don't lose at the quarterback position.
Yeah, like the two receivers, Samuel and Moore, and the COVID list. I think Moore tested positive. I don't know about Samuel, so maybe they'll Samuel, but not Moore.
Yeah,
you mentioned that idea of with your season on the line. With your season on the line, you start Taysom Hill.
All right. In fairness, last week I walked into that game saying, I can't promise you that he won't be benched based on how badly he played against the Broncos.
Right.
I can't make that promise. He ended up passing pretty well, I thought.
Yeah.
I thought he just played his best
natural. Yeah.
And so I'm not worried about him getting benched now. He draws the Eagles at maybe the best possible time. If Darius Slay doesn't end up going, that's a sizable loss. And that means that Michael Thomas is going to see Avonte Maddox and Michael Jacquet or something. I'm trying to think of who the replacement for Slay is. I think it's Michael Jacquet. That feels like a positive matchup for him. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic here about Taysom Hill. My early grade on Taysom is going to be a 9 out of 10, and I think he'll end up ranking around quarterback 7 going into this week. How do you feel about?
Yeah, he's been quarterback 6. He's been quarterback 6, and Philly's defense that has not been part of the catastrophic failure of the team.
No.
Philly's defense.
Well, particularly the run defense has been outstanding.
The run defense has been real. I mean, there was a week when they played Cleveland. They went toe to toe with Cleveland for most of that game. I think there was one of those long runs, one of those long backbreaking runs. But they went toe to toe with that Cleveland running game, which really shows you what you need to know. Speaking of Kevin Stefanski, and Cleveland and what they're doing, it's fun. It's a fun story, and this time it's real. It's not like that sugar high, false high that they had at the end of 2018. Stefanski's built something really good there.
So let me ask you, back to Hill for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me which week, if any, you believe that Drew Brees comes back.
Yeah, what Rappaport said, week 15. But Peyton was like, I don't know, he's working to get back. I mean, the hard part of this equation, Paul, is that you get the feeling that Drew Brees gets to stay when Drew Brees is going to play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the details of this 11 broken ribs, collapsed lung issue is that it was over more than one game. So he was coming into that game with broken ribs, and I mean, if it's a pain issue, although 11 broken ribs just feels to me like the potential for a complete breakdown in some way, or otherwise it's a sign that like his body is not compatible with playing football anymore. It's like,
which could be.
So
do you believe that the equity that Brees has established for 10 years in New Orleans is such that he gets to simply decide when he comes back? This goes back. It's really this Brady Arians thing again.
Yeah.
Or if Taysom Hill keeps making these incremental steps up, which is very, very possible as a young quarterback getting his feet wet. If Hill plays so well, is there a scenario where Sean Payton just says, I'm sorry, Drew, but we're going with the guy that's hot right now and the guy that defenses can't defend and can beat defenses multiple ways?
Yeah. I mean, certainly, you see Payton's affinity for Hill for years now, and this game will be a good indicator. And it could be one of those situations that answer your question, that it's fluid, right? I mean, if Hill's the worse Hill plays, the more that materially affects the team's ability to win or lose. That increases the chance that Breeze comes back. But if Hill keeps winning, let Breeze keep healing. And if the unveil of the healed Breeze is in the playoffs, all the better. If they get the number 1 seed, that's the whole other issue with the advantage creates. But again, to really pull out the most important takeaway here, Taysom Hill looked even more like a credible passer against the Falcons last week. And if the idea is, well, once you see Taysom Hill, he's easy to figure out. Well, it wasn't for the Falcons. Still an NFL defense that put Derek Carr in a pretzel 2 weeks ago. So if you say, well, it's the Falcons, well, Derek Carr looked terrible against them.
and it's the Falcons got to see him twice.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
what a huge advantage, right? I mean, you know, the first time the Falcons saw Hill, you had just a handful of plays to use for tape. Now you know everything you need to know about him.
You faced
him 2 weeks ago, and it shows up, and Hill was even better. So I'm inclined to believe that what we've seen is legit, and that he is going to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in fantasy leagues, you're happy if you have him right now. He just his synchronicity with the plays, his delivering the pass accurately on time to set up run after catch opportunities. It was very smooth. It was all very smooth. And something, now maybe the Saints have something to look forward to post Breeze, although knowing Breeze, he may be back again next week. I'll take a moment out to recognize the Giants and the Steelers, Freudian, Washington. It is 2020, Paul, where we're now respecting the NFC East. We've come all the way around to they play some pretty good football in the NFC East. I mean, they can tough out that team that wins that division. I mean, heck, 5-7, you're still maybe 2 teams from the NFC East will make it. Especially the Giants defense, what they did,
unbelievable.
I felt like that was a Giants defense announcing themselves as a force to be reckoned with in the story of the 2020 NFL. Although Seattle gets the Jets this week, so they'll bounce back. The other one I want to take, this is like Keke, starting off with Keke, ending up with Josh Allen. It's kind of self-indulgent, but he hasn't played a better game than the game he played last night.
It was awesome. I was very nervous. I was nervous going in, weren't you? That,
right. San Francisco was like, this is supposed to be San Francisco. Here they come, And Josh Allen made it his night.
He did. I thought he played incredibly well. And I don't have the box score in front of me. What, he threw 9 incompletions in the game, something like that. I mean, I thought the balance was fantastic. Accuracy was terrific. He threw his men open. Ran when he needed to run, but didn't put himself into negative positions that way. I just thought it was maybe his best overall game of the season. And I walked in nervous, and as it turned out, he rose to that occasion, and really so did that whole team, including Devin Singletary. One sack, Moss fumbled, and that was the end of his day. And Singletary, I thought, ran really, really hard, and that has not always been the case for him. I would not have described much of his running as having been powerful, determined running. But man, I thought Singletary played a really good game.
Paul, and everything you said, to add to that picture going in, like you said, the nervousness was John Brown, because it felt like John Brown was the skeleton key to when Allen was going to be comfortable and the game was just going to come to him, and his beautiful traits and abilities would just rise to the surface, and versus that frustrated Allen who's at the envelope of what he can actually do, and flopping in 4 or 5 plays that define the game, even though on other plays he's very effective. When he's uncomfortable, we've seen that stretches of that, and almost always coinciding with when Brown was out. And we are going to get to see Allen against Belichick before the end of the year, so that's going to be fantastic.
That will be fun.
But when he's comfortable, he's just a sight to behold, because it's a combination of arm strength and arm talent, and a certain boldness in playing the game and creating positive outcomes and seeing positive outcomes. And I'll tell you, and I want to bloom them, because I feel like Pittsburgh and Buffalo are like sister cities. I feel like the fan bases and the nature of how the team and the city vibe off of each other. I see it. But just as the Steelers, because let me tell you where Steelers fans are right now. The season's over. This team's not going anywhere. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Steelers fans they're not even going to win another game. Maybe they'll beat the Bengals. The Browns might win the division. I'm speaking for the Steelers fan nation right now when I say this, but as I feel that watching the Washington game yesterday, but then it's like a double feature because Buffalo, a city, and I'll say it's for Minneapolis too. I mean, Minneapolis is a long-suffering city. They're not going to win the Super Bowl this year, but you could just see in your mind's eye that Josh Allen gives a team that invincibility when he plays like that.
Yeah.
Like if we're gonna win, like this guy, we can win. We can beat anybody. And if we could, because the first time the Josh Allen Patrick Mahomes matchup was just like a flop. But if we can get that again and see if Josh Allen can really rise to that level, that's something that gives me almost chills for the city of Buffalo to know that they're close. And Josh Allen has made a leap this year larger than anybody except maybe him could have anticipated. And
he's done it without becoming. He's done it within the framework of who Josh Allen is, Sig. He hasn't become like this low risk dump off passer.
No,
I mean, he's still kind of a YOLO passer. And that's what I want from him. I want him to just be brave and just to, keep throwing these balls that sometimes look ugly. Don't care. And he's been good at just sort of brushing that off. Yeah. And it's, and I love that they haven't taken sort of the gambler out of him. And yet he's just become so much more productive. And he really has erased a lot of the negative plays, but I don't need to erase all of them. I'm totally fine with that. It's not a totally accurate comparison, but Brett Favre had some of this. There are just some guys that just need to be gunslingers, and you can't take that out of them, and you have to live with the negative plays. Favre had a bajillion interceptions. Don't care. And I'm glad they haven't taken that out of him to get to where he is today.
Yeah. So I just hope that for the Bills, whether they win or lose, I just hope in the last game of the playoffs, Josh Allen plays well. I want it to be Josh Allen playing at his best.
Yeah.
And we'll see. Okay. Off the rails. And always a fun time. Always great to have Paul Charchian here. There's true love between Charch and I. I hope I don't overstep my bounds when I say that, Paul.
Not at all.
In some ways, it's that last 10 minutes of the show when we could talk about things. But I'm going to talk about this is very special on the couch. A topic because one of my followers, last time you were on, Paul, because off the air, we've talked a little bit about Armenia. Mm-hmm. And one of my followers, I'm Connected Bro, and Nasty Armo, when I mentioned that, he reached out and sent me like a shirt. You see the flag was added back there.
Yes,
and the beads.
I see the Armenian flag.
And all kinds of other wonderful things. Like I'm going to say this wrong. Sujuk, the sausage, and some baklava, and some rose petal preserve. All these wonderful things. And I felt like it was a beacon, Paul, like a distress signal, because it's hard. This year's been hard. Oh, man. I just want to say, I say this every time, but I'll just say, I'm depressed. We're all depressed. We're all depressed so that we don't even realize how depressed we are because we're all depressed. It's like depressed has become like the norm almost in terms of energy level and want to. And the world is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. It's like your house, but there's still a world out there where things are happening. And these are moments that, certain bad actors like to use as an opportunity, these moments of chaos. And that's happening in Armenia right now. And I feel like in Armenia, I mean, it's almost like against the odds that there's still Armenian culture and we can say Armenia and this idea of a people and a history and all these wonderful things that, and what's going on there is I just wanted to call some attention to it. I think people can educate themselves about it. There's some POWs, being tortured. ArmenianWoundedHeroes.com. I wanted to call that out if you wanted to learn more or help out. But when I say this, I know just from our conversations that for you, Paul, your Armenian roots, it's, this is a time of distress, but there's also so much more that I think a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah. So the Armenian history is one that's incredibly sad, unfortunately.
Right.
And it all came to a head 100 years ago, 1915. Armenia is located, roughly, just to give people a sense, roughly between Turkey and Russia. And its land has frequently just been occupied by others and just taken from them because Armenia's never been a militaristic state and it's been surrounded by countries that primarily have been. Armenia's been historically traders and educators and merchants and builders. They're just not a warlike country. And because of that, they've been steamrolled many times. And the worst that happened was when many Armenians got displaced into Turkey in around the turn of the century, lived in Turkey for a long time, and very, very much like what happened with the Jews in Germany, the Armenians were flourishing in Turkey. They were a different religion. It's a Christian country and a Christian people, and they were successful economically. And much like the Jews in Germany, who were successful economically and were of a different religion, eventually the Turks decided that they had had enough, and they went to systematically commit genocide against the Armenians. The way it touched my family is my grandfather, my father's father, in 1915 was 5 years old, and he had a large family of 8 that lived in a small house in Turkey. And one day, the Turkish army showed up at the door and took everybody outside, and they gave the family an opportunity to recant their Christianity, which they refused. And then my grandfather's parents were murdered. They were hacked into pieces with machetes outside their house in front of their kids.
Yeah.
And only 2 of the kids survived. My great uncle and my grandfather, because they were so young. All the rest of the family was murdered right there. And so there were the 2 boys were taken in by some sympathetic Turks who hid them for a little while, and then eventually hid them in the back of a hay cart under some hay and smuggled them were able to get smuggled out of the country. And they eventually, through really good acts with other people, were able to find their way to America and ultimately have lives in America. And that's my family's roots were through that.
And out of that, today we have the joy of experiencing Paul Charchian.
Yeah, thankfully, yes. I'm very lucky.
Well, but it's a way that we live on. It's a way that through generations and through time, the echoes, like we're all the echoes of our ancestors,
No doubt.
And those stories and that trauma is part of many people's stories at many different points back. It's like in our DNA, but we're survivors. Like that's one of the things about 2020 that I try to keep reminding myself. I know I've said it on the show a few times. Like we're all survivors. Like we have the DNA of people that survived all kinds of plagues and trouble and had to hide. Even going back to like before it was humans that were the threat. Like we figured like we're the DNA, like we're the thing that keeps finding a way to persist. And why do we persist? Well, because of like rose petal preserve and baklava and whatever it is for your culture and your people and your story, whether it's your story you can trace back through generations or a story of just the things that speak to you out in the world today and now. We're not necessarily bound by a story or a shared history. We can kind of invent ourselves. That's what America's all about, is being able to invent ourselves and hopefully invent something that like celebrates life and light and finding out that like if we just see like, there's things to really appreciate in life that come from everywhere and everybody, and everybody has contributions. But I appreciate your sharing, Paul. And
no problem.
There's like real raw emotion there, but at the same time, I think that it's another one. I know I asked Ryan McDowell last week as an educator, like what he's learned about people, and he said it's like people's stories. Everybody has like a story that's so big that you just don't realize in the ways that you interact with each other's lives. And I think that's what can make us like kinder people,
absolutely. Everybody, almost everybody's got some story like this. And even in some cases you don't even know it because there wasn't recorded history of it. But to your point, Sig, to be here today through, hundreds of different permeations of ancestors, we are all survivors. And there's certain gratitude to that. You touched on Armenia currently at war. unfortunately, with the neighboring state of Azerbaijan. There's a large Armenian enclave inside of the boundaries of Azerbaijan. And it's been the source of a lot of back and forth and a lot of dispute between the two. And it's currently, unfortunately, a losing battle for the Armenians. The Turks have, once again, unfortunately, come in on the side of Azerbaijan and are arming them. And so, the Armenians are out there with, rifles, and they're getting attacked by, F-15s and, militarized drones. And, they just, they don't much have a chance. And so there are a lot of Armenians that are likely going to be displaced out of this enclave inside of Azerbaijan and trying to find their way back to Armenia. And there's a lot of bloodshed right now.
Yeah. Oh, there's just so many ripples of like suffering and pain.
There is.
I feel like, when I was a kid, Paul, and I'll have to wind this up because this is when it's really good, right? I remember when I was a kid, we lived in a house that was like, it was built maybe around the turn of the century, and I think it was occupied by one family, and like the last one there, like all of her books were still there. So there was a lot of books from like the 20s and 30s.
Wow.
And as a kid, I had the bedroom with the bookshelf, so all those books were still on there. And I remember looking through one that was just all the like editorial cartoons, but like from the 20s and 30s, like times of like World War I and World War II, building up to World War II, and an image over and over and over again was like the puppet masters. It's always the puppet, like you mentioned Turkey, Russia, the United States.
Yeah, we've been on the wrong side of many of these.
The puppet, either way, like meddling in all these affairs, drawing for their own gain, for the gain of these empires, drawing these artificial borders that then put disparate peoples together, sometimes even like stoking the conflict for, again, their benefit, arming the people, making money at like both ends. And there's just suffering and pain and suffering and pain and suffering and pain. And this is where like I reveal myself and say, like, and the flip side is like wealth, like when you think of a dollar, like there's suffering and there's pain attached to that in some ways. But now I'm really getting to the show that I want to do. Football. Who cares about football? It's 2020, but I care about football, and caring about football with everybody that listens to the show and people like Paul. It's good. I think we keep each other going, and I like showing up for y'all, and y'all certainly show up for me and for Football Guys and for everybody in the Football Guys family. And we'll see, and we get to obsess about stupid things like if this player gets 8 points and my fantasy team goes on. But in some ways, it's that release of the burden that you feel when you're not thinking about that we get to this time we spend together. So Paul, as always, thank you, and especially thank you for your moment of authenticity and real life that I think we could all find in ourselves.
Well, and thank you, Sig, for providing a platform where I feel like I can share things like that and talk to you like the good friend that you are. And I think you and I have an understanding of a little bit about how we tick, and it's a story I've only told on radio one time in my life, and I've never really talked about it in any other platform. And it's because I feel comfortable with you and who you are. And I know your followers are built from that same sort of cloth that you weave. So thank you for the platform and the opportunity and being who you are.
Oh, it's my privilege and pleasure. And really, I'm just reflecting, like you said, it's the people that gather around us. So everybody, continue to see you throughout the week as we build up to week 14, hopefully week 14 with just games on Thursday and Sunday and Monday. And we'll see you all the flip side as always. So we appreciate you always being there for us because you are so very classy.